Do you think, I'm curious, do you think that the idea of human survival of death is an anti-scientific claim?
Well, in the naive form that most people entertain it clearly is. Now, this is
well, they don't think that their body doesn't disintegrate. They assume that it does disintegrate. What they assume is that there is something inside of you that is eternal, which I assume as well.
And
it doesn't seem to me
doesn't
seem to me anti-scientific.
Well, it's anti-scientific if you believe that you have good evidence for that. I mean, this is what's anti-scientific. When your certainty, when your convictions don't scale with your evidence. I mean, I'm actually open-minded on the survival of death. I don't know.
You say about reincarnation, that there could even be evidence for it in your book.
Yes, I mean, I can easily tell you what would constitute evidence. I'm not saying this evidence exists, but I mean, I can tell you what would constitute evidence for the truth of Mormonism. It's just not forthcoming.
We're not going to get political on this.
I mean, there are all kinds of scientific things you can say about religion, which religious people tend not to want to hear. I mean, you can say, for instance, that Mormonism is objectively less likely to be true than Christianity. Now, why can you say this? Because Mormonism is just Christianity plus some rather stupid ideas.
Let me ask you seriously a question that's not... This question is actually not a gotcha at all. I really do wonder whether you believe that it is possible, since you say something about the viability of intuition in your book, I wonder if you think that it's possible for people to know things, or, if you don't want to use know, to believe true things and feel like they have evidence for true things that is not accessible through reason? Or is that not possible?
Yeah, well, this opposition between intuition and reason ultimately is a false one, because our reasoning is intuitive to the core. I mean, if I ask you how you know that 2 + 2 makes 4, you will be at pains to explain it. And intuition is simply that mode we're operating in, where things just strike us as true or false, and we can't get beneath them. Now, there are ways to get beneath them scientifically. I mean, we can know a lot about intuition and failures of intuition. And we use certain intuitions to get around other intuition. I mean, just take a very simple example. If I asked you how, if you folded a newspaper 100 times, how thick would it be? Most people intuitively think, well, I can do that, and it's going to be, as thick as the Sunday Times or a brick or something. But it's actually, 6 billion light years across. Now, how we get there with just the intuitions of arithmetic. I mean, you explain the process of exponentiation to somebody, how to fold a piece of paper 100 times is to essentially multiply its thickness by 2 raised to the power of 100, and then you see that the numbers get very big. Now, this is reasoning. This is you don't get much more rigorous than arithmetic in terms of reasoning, but it is intuitive to the core. The fact that any of this is intelligible is a matter of intuition. So yes, there are ethical intuitions. There are, I would argue, contemplative or spiritual intuitions, but no intuition you can have when you sit down in prayer or in meditation is going to authenticate most of what religious people believe most of the time in the service of their religions, like the virgin birth of Jesus, or the divine origin.
No, I agree, and I don't think that most religious people would say that that comes to them through intuition. But I wonder, since from the beginning of time, 98% of all human beings who have ever lived have had an intuitive sense that there is something, some being or force greater than themselves, does that constitute for you even a scintilla of evidence that it's true?
No.
Okay. So just asking.
You touched on something earlier that relates to a question I want to ask. Many writers dealing with this subject have talked about the dangers of religious fundamentalism, of extremism. You've talked about religious moderates.
Right.
If you could share those ideas, and I know you're interested in this topic as well.
Yes.
So,
well, an example of it, although not a particularly egregious one, emerged in this conversation. I mean, the fact that you would say belief in God is not a matter of believing propositions. That is the kind of utterance one hears from religious moderates. I don't know how you would describe yourself, but you're not.
I'm a fanatic.
You're not a fanatic.
No. Not about this, though. About other.
The problem with saying that is that it effectively covers for. I mean, what you're arguing.
Right.
This is what religion should be, essentially, and yet it becomes a kind of descriptive claim. This is what religion is, and so we can slip into a mode of not acknowledging just how much mad work and how much needless human suffering is being perpetuated because of explicit propositions
so the
that
moderates
people
make
believe.
it acceptable, and you don't really realize how bad things are.
Well, one moderates want faith itself to be respected at all costs. And they want the basic project of raising children to be Jews or Muslims or Christians to be respected. And in that context, it is often very difficult to honestly evaluate just how much needless human suffering is being produced on a daily basis by religion and religious belief.
So I understand what you're saying, that you, and I've read that you indict moderates because we give cover, in a way, for religious fanaticism. I would say two things, and I suspect the second will be the basis of another conversation here. The first is that it is, let's say, I don't know that I like the word moderates, but it is healthy religion that provides the only hope for sick religion to be well. I don't think that there is any chance that the preaching of irreligion will in fact persuade those who are fanatic to change their ways, but I think those who know how to speak the same language have some chance of doing that. The second point that I would make is that when you talk about the needless suffering that religion has caused, I think that it's time maybe to address the historical record, because I think that religion's record is nothing less than exemplary compared to irreligion. And so I would say that if you're going to try in this world to make a decent world, that historically speaking, although I won't speak for the future, you are much better off training people to believe that they are not the most powerful, most knowledgeable, most decisively able to come to conclusions about the world creation, but that in fact a certain amount of humility, both about what they know and what they do, is appropriate, and that humility
But how, Rabbi, how do you have tolerance?
Comes from.
But how do you have tolerance and faith coexist?
Well, it has throughout history. Oh, sure it has. Absolutely. I mean, even today, let's take the most intolerant. You know, I find this really interesting. People, the other night, we had somebody who was, at the very least, I would say, as extraordinarily, she is I think she would probably call herself a reformed Muslim, no longer a Muslim. She grew up in Muslim society, is extremely harsh on Islam. So I said to her, what about Indonesia, which is the largest Muslim country? And she said, you know, we're very afraid of Indonesia being radicalized. And I thought to myself, if you're very afraid of Indonesia being radicalized, what does that mean about the largest Muslim country? That it has not yet been radicalized, or that there was a time before it was radicalized. And the idea that if somebody is the member of a certain faith, such as Christianity, which introduced the idea of toleration to the Western world, that therefore they can't be tolerant, is clearly contradicted by much of history. And it seems to me that if you want to find intolerance, you look for atheistic regimes. Would you rather live in North Korea or South Korea? Okay. South Korea is Christian.
Don't
North
answer
Korea is
that
communist.
Yeah. Well, you cited many examples in your book.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, this is a trick, and this is one of the reasons why
It's not a trick.
I'm not a fan of the term atheism. I mean, atheism is a term totally without content. It's like being a non-astrologer. You know? I mean, we don't have a word for someone who's not an astrologer. And if astrologers suddenly became ascendant in our society, we wouldn't need to invent non-astrology as a discipline. We could talk about reason and science and evidence and common sense and bullshit, and put astrologers in their place. And so it could be with religion. And so this notion that Stalin and Hitler and Pol Pot were doing what they did because of atheism, because of non-belief in God. I mean, ask yourself, is too much skeptical inquiry really what's wrong with North Korea? I I mean, the North Koreans are a cargo cult armed with nuclear weapons right now. They think that the food aid that we give them is a devotional offering to the genius of their dear leader. They are systematically impoverished, both physically and in terms of information. Too much knowledge, any knowledge is too much knowledge in North Korea. This is not a paradise of reasonableness. Now, all I'm advocating is that we use the same standards of rationality that we use in every other area of our lives when people start making claims about the divine origin of certain books and the virgin birth of certain people and the glorious end to history where the good people will be raptured into the sky. These are the kinds of things that we should apply pressure to. And it is taboo to apply pressure to these claims. And religious moderation, unfortunately, ramifies that taboo.